Okay, this is my very, very brief introduction to the five-factor model. simSchool is, of course, based on the five-factor model, and it's a model that suggests that all personality types can be described using 5 dimensions or traits, and those are, briefly, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And if you'll notice over here on the left side of the screen, I made the first letter of each of those factors a little larger and also a different color, so it will stand out to help you also remember that the five-factor model is sometimes known as the OCEAN model, an acronym OCEAN for openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. And very briefly, what each one of these stand for, beginning with openness, or openness to experience. This dimension measures the likelihood that you will seek or appreciate new experiences. People on the high end here will probably be inventive, curious, but people on the low end are going to be more consistent and cautious. Now, there's something to remember with the 5 factors is that being high or low, one's not more desirable than the other. It's just that you're going to lean more to one end or to the other. This is really just to describe you, not diagnose you. Some adjectives that you might hear associated with a person high on the scale for openness is artistic, curious, imaginative, insightful, original. They're really into feelings and ideas. They frequently appreciate fantasy and are often perceived as unconventional. The next factor is conscientiousness, and this one is the degree to which you are self-disciplined and achievement-oriented. People at the high end of this scale are more likely to be efficient and organized, while those at the low end might be considered a little bit careless. And of course, adjectives associated with somebody at the high end would be efficient, organized, reliable, responsible, thorough, orderly, competent, deliberative, and self-disciplined. The next factor is extroversion, and this dimension measures the tendency that we have towards seeking the stimulation in the company of others. And when we think of extroversion, we also think of introversion, and what a lot of people think or normally assume is that introversion is synonymous with shyness, and that extroversion just means that you're really outgoing and probably talk a lot. But that's not really true. Those are really two separate concepts, especially in this context. Extroverted people can still be very shy, but they are very interested in being around other people. Whereas I've known some very outgoing introverts that were not shy at all, but they just really preferred to, keep to themselves. So a person at the high end of the extroversion scale is going to be outgoing and energetic. The person at the low end is going to be solitary and reserved. It doesn't mean necessarily that they're going to fear speaking. It just means that they'd rather be left alone. Adjectives for a person high on the extroversion scale would be active, assertive, energetic, enthusiastic, outgoing, talkative, warm, and gregarious. Agreeableness is the next factor, and it measures the degree to which you care about other people. And if you're on the high end of this scale, you're going to be considered friendly and compassionate. And people who are on the low end of this scale may come across as cold or unkind. And adjectives for those on the high end of the scale are appreciative, forgiving, generous, kind, sympathetic, trusting, altruistic, maybe modest. Finally, we have neuroticism, and this trait describes how emotionally stable a person is. And somebody at the high end of the scale is going to be rather sensitive and maybe nervous, and people at the low end are more confident and secure. And kind of to the extent that any of these may be positive or negative as you go from one extreme to the other, probably a higher level of neuroticism is not necessarily a really great thing, whereas a high level of conscientiousness in our society would be considered pretty good. Somebody at the high end of the scale might be considered anxious, tense, touchy, unstable, impulsive, self-conscious, depressed, or even hostile. Let's talk about some of the people who have done research in this area, including Schultz and Valiant, Young, McRae, Engelleitner, Ryman, Livesley, etc. Here's just a few ideas relating to the 5 factors. Some of the important characteristics or things to remember is that the factors are dimensions. It's not a type, and none of these things alone defines a person's personality. It's in combination that some things revealed about a person. And second, the factors have been stable over a 45-year period, beginning in young adulthood. So a person, once you're an adult, these things aren't really going to change over time very much. Thirdly, factors and their specific facets are heritable. In other words, some researchers think that some of these factors you inherit from your mom and dad. Fourth, the factors are probably adaptive. Fifth, they're considered universal and have been recovered in diverse languages. The example here is from German to Chinese. And then finally, knowing your own placement in the factors is useful for insight. And let's talk a little bit more. This video's getting a little long, but I want to talk just briefly about how they relate to simSchool. We didn't go into great detail about the reports that are generated at the end of a module with our first lab, but we're going to look at that a lot more closely here. And so this is a good time to talk about how they tie to the 5-factor model or the ocean model. If you see here, we have a little checklist: academic, openness, conscientiousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. So you see we have the 5 factors along with the other facet, which is academic. And each one of these is measured anytime you see a report from a module that you've run in simSchool. And so each one of your learners in that module, whether you've got 1 or 20, are going to be measured on each one of those factors and also on an academic scale. And you're going to be able to see how they did at the end. And if you look below here, I have a little chart. I have just a piece of a little chart, and you can see the scale. The norm is 0, and you're either above it or below it. And in this case, the learner started at 0 or at average or above average on all of these facets. The 5 factors as well as academic performance. And then based on the tasks you assign and also the comments or questions you ask the students, each one of these attributes is going to go up and down. And we're going to talk about this more in detail later. I just wanted to get you thinking about how it's related. And I think that this is probably enough detail for this section. And if you go back to Blackboard, and I think now it's time for us to start creating students and setting up modules. Thanks.